Repeating, the second wave of integration. It's déjà vu all over again. Yogi Berra. During the 1990s, hospitals tried to perform alchemy. By creating integrated delivery networks, IDNs, they hoped to transform a fragmented and costly healthcare system into one that was aligned and efficient. Instead, they mostly transformed black ink into red. It seemed that the magic of integration was gone. A decade later, everyone believed that the magic was back. As we described in Chapter 3, many factors contributed to the demise of IDNs, none more than the failure to change how physicians used their pens. IDNs spent heavily to acquire physician practices, but did not give them the incentives or information needed to change their practice patterns. They instead relied on bureaucratic structures that only served to alienate physicians. Hospitals also tried to add structure to relationships with independent physicians, through an alphabet soup of strategic alliances. While adding costly layers of management, these alliances were impotent and empty as vehicles for contracting. Unable to make these relationships work, hospitals put a hold on physician integration. A few hospitals engaged in widespread divestment. Others tried to make a go of it, correctly reasoning that most of the costs were sunk, and optimistically reasoning that they would eventually be able to wring economies out of their growing systems. IDN forays into risk contracting proved equally inept. Recall that in the fourth and final stage of market evolution, providers would organize into integrated systems that accept full financial responsibility for their patients' medical expenditures. Hospitals failed to appreciate that this would oblige them to assume the role of health insurer, which required a very different skill set. The dream of population health management was also put on hold. One part of the IDN strategy proved successful for hospitals, if not for anyone else. By merging with erstwhile competitors, hospitals gained valuable bargaining leverage against managed care organizations, MCOs. Point 1. This gave them the revenues they needed to offset their losses from physician integration and risk contracting, and to fund further growth. Hospital executives were smart enough to stick with a winning strategy, and the horizontal merger wave continued unabated until the FTC victory in the ENH case. Even after ENH, hospitals continued to consolidate local markets in Illinois, Ohio, Virginia, and elsewhere, only to be rebuffed by the courts. Hospitals have since learned to avoid the most obvious anti-competitive mergers, and have expanded outside their immediate home markets. Partners expanded into southern Massachusetts, UPMC into western and, more recently, central Pennsylvania, Sutter spread across northern California, and so forth. Throughout the decade, the number of hospital systems, the number of hospitals in a system, and the percentage of community hospitals in systems all continued to grow. By 2010, hospitals had begun reassembling the vertical components of IDNs. They ramped up physician acquisitions and installed costly electronic health records, ERRs, to try to control the physician's pen and maximize reimbursement for what they did. They pursued many of the same structures witnessed in the 1990s, and also developed a new type called an Accountable Care Organization, ACO. ACOs put hospitals back into the business of managing risk, offering the opportunity of capturing a portion of any savings they generated, while giving back a portion of any excessive costs. Hospitals could choose how much risk they wanted to bear. Larger rewards entailed larger risks. Some hospitals jumped back into the deep end of risk management, offering their own provider-sponsored health plans. To many observers, hospitals have gone back to the future with strategies, graphics, and buzzwords reminiscent of prior efforts. Was this a reaffirmation of the 1990s strategies to develop IDNs, this time armed with new tactics, ACOs, and tools, ERRs? Or was this a mindless retreading of old and discredited strategies? Were IDNs prospering by creating value for their patients, or were they merely finding new ways to exploit market power? To some extent, the correct answer is all of the above. We are more than a bit pessimistic, as we explain in the next 3 chapters. The evidence for market power is stark and depressing. The evidence for value creation is mixed and troubling. All is not yet well in the healthcare world. Doppelgangers. By 2010, the industry was repeating many of the integration themes, both horizontal and vertical, that were so pervasive in the 1990s. Table 5.1 shows that many of the important concepts central to healthcare in the 1990s have their 2010s counterparts. Point 2. Capitated payment models morphed into risk contracting models. Cost-effective care is now value-based care. Integrated delivery networks are bigger than ever, but nowadays we talk about their close cousins, ACOs. And for some reason, perhaps to mask past failures, we have replaced the lofty iron triangle, access, quality, and cost containment, with a new trinity, the triple aim, patient experience, which includes access, population health, which includes quality, and cost containment. 3. Why does history seem to be repeating what was regarded as unsatisfactory the first time around? One can make the case that integration was an idea before its time, lacking only the infrastructure and supporting systems to make it work. With ERRs, real-time patient information, data analytics, and other innovations, the health system might be poised to implement the desired changes that were heretofore elusive. There are also important differences in the prime mover of integration. The private sector initiated and implemented the 1990s transformation, with the government as a passive observer, particularly after the failure of the Clinton Health Plan. This time around, the Affordable Care Act of 2010, popularly known as Obamacare, promoted the formation of ACOs, and with it came a potential financial windfall for integrated providers. Table 5.1. History repeating. 1990s concept. 2010s doppelganger. Capitation. Risk contracting. Cost-effective care. Value-based care. Integrated delivery network. Accountable care organization. Hospital-physician alliances. Hospital-physician networks. Physician practice management. Physician equity models. Health maintenance organizations. Narrow provider networks. Iron triangle. Triple aim. Another view is that there has been a single 25-year trend toward integration, albeit with a brief hiatus. 3 factors may have contributed to the hiatus. First, provider systems lost more money than they expected, and needed time to regroup. Second, the Balanced Budget Act of 1997 prolonged their misery by sharply cutting Medicare hospital reimbursements. Finally, systems may have needed time to renegotiate managed care contracts for each newly acquired provider. It was not until the early 2000s that systems had completed these renegotiations and fully began to reap the financial rewards of their growing market power, which they plowed back into further acquisitions. A less charitable explanation draws on the insight of John Kenneth Galbraith. Point 4 Galbraith wondered why investors repeat the mistakes from prior financial crashes, seemingly having learned nothing from the past. He concluded that old ideas were respun by newer generations of managers and policymakers every 20 years or so. As the prior generations who were chastened enough not to repeat those ideas died off or retired, new generations came in believing they had discovered something afresh. Healthcare executives may have fallen victim to the same trap, putting old wine in new bottles. Perhaps all of these interpretations have some element of truth. Which interpretation one prefers likely reflects one's ideology and ingrained level of cynicism. As academics who have studied IDNs since their inception and produced a healthy chunk of research revealing lackluster performance, we lean toward the market power and old wine in new bottles explanations while still trying to keep an open mind. We actually admire some IDNs, see Chapter 10, and have written articles with their executives. In the remainder of this chapter we will describe the startling resurgence of mega providers and offer some of the most likely reasons for their growth. In the next chapter, we will document that big systems have failed to constrain health spending. If anything, they are more expensive, and we will offer some explanations for these distressing facts. In the last chapter on the topic, we will examine how powerful mega providers continue to evade punishment by the antitrust agencies. Highlighting the trends. The integration movement that began in the mid to late 2000s may have seemed reminiscent of the 1990s, but there was a clear difference in one respect: there was a lot more going on in the new millennium. Integration was apparent everywhere one looked, taking place on a much bigger scale and at a faster pace. Hospital mergers. With a few exceptions such as AHRF, the IDNs of the 1990s survived with their hospitals intact. Hospitals took a break from horizontal mergers in the early 2000s, when the number of annual deals fell from a merger wave of over 100 to just 38 in 2003. Merger activity has since rebounded, with more than 100 mergers every year since 2014. Hospital-physician integration. Many, if not most, hospitals quickly discovered that they would be unlikely to pay back the huge upfront bonuses doled out during the bidding wars for physician practices. With most practices incurring operating losses, enthusiasm for further acquisitions quickly waned. This was an overreaction. Once hospitals accounted for the profits generated by physician referrals, they realized that some specialties and practices were making operating profits for the system. Integration therefore reached a kind of stasis, where hospitals were neither acquiring nor divesting physician practices. Instead of acquiring more physicians, hospitals turned their attention to making their existing practices more profitable. Learning some lessons from the 1990s, hospitals rewrote contracts to exclude goodwill payments and guaranteed salaries, and to include productivity clauses. The prevalence of integrated salary models, ISM, the label used by the American Hospital Association to denote physician employment, in hospitals increased thereafter, as did the number of hospital-employed physicians, especially after 2003. While the number of employed PCPs slowly increased, the number of employed specialists took off. While hospitals mainly acquired PCPs in the hope of winning referrals, they started employing specialists to exploit changes in Medicare payment rules that hurt physician reimbursement, as we will explain in the next chapter. At the same time, a new class of employed specialist emerged, the hospitalist. 5 specialists work full-time in the hospital to cover specific patient services, example an intensivist to cover the intensive care unit, a laborist to cover the maternity unit, a surgicalist to cover the operating room, and to provide broad oversight of the treatment of inpatients admitted by community-based physicians. Today, there are an estimated 44,000 hospitalists, and hospitals employ a third of them. Why did hospitals become interested in hospitalists? One reason was to cater to the needs of admitting physicians in the community who did not want, or financially could not afford, to leave their busy office practices to see their patients in the hospital. A second reason was the perceived need to have one in-house physician to help coordinate the patient's care and journey through the institution. An influential 2002 case study in the Annals of Internal Medicine bolstered support for hospitalists. 6 Subsequent research evidence on their effectiveness is mixed. However, there is no consistent impact on quality of care or patient satisfaction, mixed evidence on cost, and a minor effect on shortening lengths of stays. 7 One study suggests that hospitalists may reduce inpatient costs by facilitating early discharge, only to see patients spend even more money after they leave the hospital. A situation reminiscent of the quicker but sicker problem that plagued the DRG system in its early years. 8 Still, belief in hospitalists remains strong. Integration into health plans. After a long withdrawal, hospitals are again taking a dip into the waters of full risk contracting. Between 2010 and 2017, at least 17 hospital systems started their own health plans, although many are barely profitable and at least 6 have already closed. 9 This is partly an extension of the risk-taking inherent in ACOs, but mainly is a reaffirmation of the view, widely held in the 1990s, that vertical integration will lower costs. Through their own provider-sponsored plans, hospitals hope to fully reap the benefits of integration efficiencies. Integration into post-acute care. Hospitals have returned to the post-acute care business by developing both vertical and virtual linkages with hospices, long-term care facilities, and home health agencies. Both strategies resembled the 1990s IDN effort to prepare for risk contracting and to develop the continuum of care. Payer integration with physicians. Not to be outdone, private insurers are vertically integrating into the physician practice business. With 30,000 physician employees as of spring 2018, United Healthcare in its Optum division is the largest employer of physicians in the United States. With its recent merger, Aetna/CVS has also combined insurance and medical practice under one roof. We will have much more to say about these arrangements in Chapter 9. Physician Practice Management. Since the time of the PPM crash and burn in the late 1990s, private equity firms have re-entered the business. This time around, they are targeting hospital-based practitioners in such areas as emergency medicine, radiology, and anesthesiology, rather than primary care. Causes of integration. A confluence of factors has led to the resurgence of healthcare integration. While one can point to a single government policy, the failed Clinton Health Plan, as a catalyst for integration in the 1990s, integration in the new millennium is perhaps the unintended consequence of no less than 7 federal policy developments that bolstered forces already at play in the private sector. Public sector drivers. In an effort to address the problem of enforcing the sustainable growth rate formula in Medicare payments, during 2004 and 2005 the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, pivoted to Pay for Performance, P4P, as an alternative strategy to reduce spending by rewarding providers when they achieved quality benchmarks. 10 P4P programs were increasingly implemented by both public and private payers to control hospital and physician costs. Hospitals responded by trying to work with their physicians to simultaneously reduce cost and improve quality. As with efforts to deal with managed care pressures in the 1990s, hospitals believed that the best way to change the behavior of physicians was to employ them. At the same time that CMS was offering bonuses for efficiency, the Deficit Reduction Act of 2005 reduced Medicare payments by 20 to 40% to cardiologists, orthopedists, and medical oncologists for in-office imaging procedures. 11 The financial impact motivated many of these specialists to seek safety in hospital employment. A few years later, the Meaningful Use provisions of the HITECH Act of 2009 incentivized physicians to incorporate heirs into their practices, initially to gain extra reimbursement, and later on to avoid financial penalties. Heirs were very expensive, however, costing as much as $1 million or more for a small medical group practice. While HITECH provided physicians some financial assistance in purchasing heirs, hospitals that employed physicians could help them offset the costs of heir adoption and the associated overhead. So, in a sort of reversal from the 1990s, physicians began seeking out hospitals, and not the other way around. As a result, the price of acquiring physician practices plummeted. Another important driver of integration resulted from an obscure change to an obscure payment calculation. When an independent physician bills Medicare, or most private insurers, for a given service delivered in their medical office, they receive a single fee meant to account for their time and office expenses. When a hospital-employed physician provides the identical service, even in an identical office, they submit 2 bills, one for professional fees, meant to cover physician costs, and one for technical fees, meant to cover overhead. Historically, the total reimbursement to hospitals has exceeded the total paid to independent physicians, even for the same service performed in the same location. The purported reason for this is to help hospitals defray their higher overhead costs. Note that this reason casts doubt on claims that hospitals enjoy scope economies. This meant that if a hospital acquires a physician practice, payment rates increase formulaically, and at faster rates over time. 12 In 2008, CMS changed the survey it used to measure costs, with the result that the differential between hospital and independent physician payments mostly increased, with especially large increases in some specialties such as cardiology and radiology. This made it that much more attractive for hospitals to employ physicians. A recent study shows that this change in surveys and the financial windfall it created are responsible for about 25% of all recent hospital acquisitions of physician practices. 13 CMS has taken some steps to close this loophole, but has not gone far enough. Finally, the ACA expanded hospital eligibility for the 340B drug discount program, which allowed hospitals to purchase drugs at a 25 to 50% discount. Hospitals now had an incentive to employ community-based oncologists who obtain 70 to 77% of their revenues from chemotherapy drugs. Accountable care organizations. If there was any doubt about the need to integrate, a key provision of the ACA helped put it to rest. And for once, IDNs would have to cut costs in order to fully reap the benefits. The ACA created a new organizational model for providers, called Accountable Care Organizations, ACOs. ACOs can be formed by hospitals, physician groups, or even independent physicians. There are several key ingredients to the ACO program. 1. CMS assigns Medicare enrollees to ACOs. While the assignment rules are complex, they essentially boil down to this: CMS assigns Medicare beneficiaries to an ACO if they receive the majority of primary care from providers who belong to the ACO. This means that beneficiaries do not choose an ACO, CMS chooses it for them. 2. During the year, CMS pays hospitals and other providers using its standard fee schedules. At the end of the year, it compares the actual spending for patients assigned to ACOs, including expenses incurred by providers who do not belong to the ACO, against expected spending based on patient demographics and prior health status. 3. The ACO can receive shared savings reimbursements if its actual spending comes in below the expected level. At the start of the year, the ACO can choose one of several risk-bearing tracks. ACOs that want to dip their feet into the waters can agree to a small percentage of any savings. More ambitious ACOs will receive a larger portion of the savings if they agree to return to CMS a portion of any excessive costs. The actual rules are much more complicated, and have recently changed to include advanced payment and next-generation models with even stronger financial incentives. 4. ACOs receive pay-for-performance bonuses based on successfully hitting dozens of quality metrics. Figure 5.2. Boundaries of the ACO. Adapted from the Dartmouth Institute for Health Policy and Clinical Practice. Sensing a chance to reap financial windfalls, providers have eagerly formed ACOs, with nearly 1,000 ACOs responsible for the costs of caring for more than 30 million Americans. There are few restrictions on who can participate, and a wide array of provider organizations offer them. Figure 5.2 depicts the organizational boundaries of a typical system-led ACO. 14 The ACO is a nexus of providers, services, and initiatives, such as wellness. Some are offered by the integrated system, shown in the upper left of the figure, while others are secured by contract, as shown on the upper right and below. Remove the hospitals from the upper left and place them with the other providers on the right, and you have a physician-led ACO. In practice, ACOs range from fully integrated systems to virtually integrated networks and strategic alliances. As IDNs learned in the 1990s, risk-bearing can be a difficult business. By handling most of the difficult financial transactions, CMS has minimized the administrative burden of risk-bearing and, in the process, has done us all a favor. ACOs might have been a catalyst for hospital-based mega-providers to further extend their stranglehold, but instead, physician-sponsored Medicare ACOs and joint venture ACOs between independent physicians and hospitals both outnumber hospital-sponsored ACOs. 15 The largest ACOs, however, are usually organized by large IDNs. In promoting ACOs, CMS had one other trick up its sleeve. In the 1990s, HMOs fell victim to the managed care backlash against perceptions of substandard quality and restricted choice. To avoid the HMO stigma, CMS chose a very different name and used some important new rules. Start with shared savings. Critics contend that HMOs have a financial incentive to skimp on care. ACOs have only a fraction of those incentives. Or take a look at access to care. HMO enrollees must choose from providers in mostly narrow networks. In principle, Medicare beneficiaries have free choice of providers both within and outside the ACOs provider network, though ACOs make every effort to keep them from going outside. Finally, HMO members know they are enrolled, whereas Medicare beneficiaries have no idea they have been assigned to ACOs. For all these reasons, there is little chance of a backlash against ACOs. ACOs may be little more than HMO lights, less restrictive, with half the incentives. But they are politically viable HMO lights, and they have been very successful in the marketplace. After just 7 years, ACOs already serve half as many Americans as HMOs. Unfortunately, the evidence we present in the next chapter shows that they are not saving any money. The authors of this book fully support the experiments and incentives embodied both by HMOs and ACOs. For now, however, most ACOs are sucking wind. From the Deficit Reduction Act to the ACA, a decade of federal rules and regulations have catalyzed the new IDN movement in two distinct ways. Congress and CMS intended that many of these policy changes would correct unfair payment practices, but instead they had the unintended consequence of promoting physician-hospital integration. Other changes, especially the formation of ACOs, more directly rewarded cost-cutting, and they all promoted the further growth of powerful mega-providers. It is all reminiscent of the late Harold Domsetz's two systems of belief about the rise of monopolies. 16 Under the self-sufficiency theory, efficient firms outcompete their rivals and dominate markets, to the benefit of all. Under the interventionism theory, monopoly power arises from government intervention, to the benefit of no one except the monopolists. As we explain in the next chapter, thus far the interventionism theory carries more weight. Private sector motivators. Neither the self-sufficiency theory nor the interventionism theory might have gained much traction were it not for the encouragement of health policy gurus, who once again viewed IDNs as the elixir for all that continued to ail the health economy. In 2008, the policy analyst and head of CMS, under President Obama Don Barrick and his colleagues published an influential paper titled The Triple Aim, which called on providers to simultaneously address population health, per capita cost, and the patient's experience of care. Hospitals jumped on the bandwagon and treated Barrick as their guru. The president-elect of the American Hospital Association proclaimed in 2016, "It's all about the triple aim." Hospitals believed that integration was necessary to achieve the triple aim, even though hardly anyone could tell you what population health meant, health status, how Barrick actually measured it, life expectancy and morbidity levels, or what hospital executives could actually do about it. Not much. Second, between 2006 and 2008, researchers at the Commonwealth Fund and elsewhere began to herald the twofold transformation of the healthcare system. 1. Move away from fee-for-service, FFS, to alternative payment models, including pay-for-performance, bundled payment, episodes of care, and capitation, and 2. Move away from fragmented delivery sites, example solo practice of physicians, freestanding hospitals, to more integrated provider systems such as IDNs, ACOs, and Kaiser-like IHOs. 17. This transformation was not only advocated, it became normative, and was already underway. The ACA was a huge step in this direction, due to its encouragement of ACOs and its new methods of paying them. This transformation was alternatively billed as the movement from volume to value, where value was defined as quality divided by cost. 18. The transformation narrative was repeated so often that everyone believed it was true, inevitable, and a positive development. Part of the narrative involved moving from less integrated to more integrated models of healthcare delivery. Of course, this meant bigger size, bigger networks of hospitals and physicians, and bigger bargaining power, all cloaked in the name of having the ability to manage risk in population health. Thus, integration now served as the vehicle to achieve the triple aim, and to achieve a host of lofty goals. Of course, no one bothered to articulate the process by which forming mega-providers increased one's life expectancy or made one feel better. As in the IDN wave of the 1990s, there was an element of proof by assertion, saying it so made it so. Provider justifications for integration. Even without a push from the ACA and policy wonks, hospitals had many reasons to renew the integration wave. Some hospitals foresaw shortages in certain specialties and thought it best to employ physicians in these fields, rather than risk being short-staffed. Other hospitals partnered with physicians in an attempt to mitigate competition with entrepreneurial physicians who set up competing imaging facilities and ASCs. Hospitals also hired star physicians to lead centers of excellence, in an effort to distinguish themselves from competitors and embrace the growing movement in pursuit of quality care. By and large, the most important justifications for integration echoed those from the 1990s. Hospitals sought to increase their share of the growing outpatient market, to increase their revenues through risk contracting, and to increase their leverage over payers. They still believed that employment would increase physicians' loyalty and alignment. In further echoes of the past, many health services researchers again claimed that physician-hospital integration might confer several benefits. 19 These included the efficient production of hospital services, improved communication and coordination of care across sites, development of an in-network continuum of care, aligned incentives, preparedness for new payment models and organizational models, reduction in wasteful spending, and ability to make investments in population health. As in the 1990s, the goals espoused by researchers often bore little resemblance to the motivations of providers. 20 And as we will explain in the next chapter, the goals espoused by both often had little basis in economic and organizational realities. The elusive goal of physician alignment and engagement. As part of this effort to integrate, hospitals now began talking about engagement with physicians to transform care delivery, for example, to reduce waste and variation, and to embrace care protocols in evidence-based medicine and thereby demonstrate value to payers. Point 21. It was not clear what engagement really meant, or how it differed from the alignment sought during the 1990s integration effort. Researchers have noted that, like alignment, the concept of engagement is broad and indistinct. 22. Some researchers view at American Samoa the opposite of burnout. Others tailor the definition to specific activities such as reducing disparities in treatment styles, coordinating care, or improving safety. Most definitions are reminiscent of alignment, including physicians' commitment to the enterprise, willingness to exert effort, emotional attachment, trust, decision-making voice, conflict resolution, motivation to perform, ability to suggest and implement improvements, and willingness to advocate for the organization in which they work. Some organizations, like Press Ganey, tried to separate the two terms by distinguishing physician alignment, perceived strong partnership, or connection with the organization's leadership, from physician engagement, appraisal of the work environment, emotional experiences, and attachment to workplace. Point 23. The literature conflicts on whether alignment leads to engagement or vice versa. 24. Not only was there confusion about what the outcomes of integration were, but we soon discovered that the types of integration between hospitals and physicians were also incredibly varied. The Health Systems Integration Study, HSIS, of the 1990s talked about three types of integration in organized delivery systems, functional, physician system, and clinical. Point 25. The first type applied only to the hospitals in a system and the degree to which they standardized their back-office functions, example accounting, finance, human resources. The other two types applied to physicians and their relationships to hospitals. In the 2000s, research muddied the waters by specifying three types of physician-hospital integration: non-financial, financial, and clinical. Point 26. The non-financial mechanisms spanned a whole array of hospital efforts to market their physicians to patients and beef up their practices, all without money's changing hands. There was nothing new here. Hospitals had been doing these things for years. The financial mechanisms involved economic transfers from hospitals to physicians, and spanned a wide array of arrangements. One study listed nearly 50 ways that organizations may contract with and compensate physicians. Point 27. Nowadays, many healthcare executives treat integration like a checklist. Create medical executive positions? Check. Offer an imaging center through a joint venture with radiologists? Check. Use hospitalists? Check. And on and on and on. This is no way to manage an integrated system. The next chapter will develop this theme. Expectation: things will be different this time around. In his 1936 novel The Last Puritan, the philosopher George Santayana famously warned, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." 28. This has become a catch-all phrase used to condemn nearly any effort to dredge up a previously failed strategy. It is not always true. What once failed might now succeed, provided that the surrounding circumstances are conducive. If there is any hope that 2010's integration will succeed where 1990's integration failed, then some things must have changed. The good news is that there have been important changes, allowing us some room for optimism. For starters, hospitals have learned some lessons from their past failures. Hospitals that eagerly embraced risk contracting in the 1990s enjoyed the return to fee-for-service medicine in the 2000s, and did not return to risk contracts until ACOs offered them shared savings with minimal downside risk. Hospitals have also largely managed to avoid overbidding for physicians. One reason for this is that hospitals are a lot better at valuing practices. They also take more time to woo physicians, thereby avoiding the bidding frenzies that once drove practice values through the roof. The lack of an active private equity market vying for physician practices, at least until recently, has also helped. Perhaps the most important change is in the attitude of physicians. In the 1990s, hospitals had to pay premiums to pry physicians away from their private practices. A decade later, physicians were eager sellers. They had grown tired of ever-increasing administrative hassles in dealing with payers, they were fed up with malpractice premiums, and they were facing big expenses for heirs. Demographic changes in the medical profession further worked in favor of hospitals. An ever-increasing number of women entering the profession, combined with a growing number of households with two working spouses, meant that more physicians were looking for regular hours and guaranteed incomes. There were now enough potential physician employees to satisfy the growth objectives of every system, and bidding wars became a thing of the past. Moreover, with the majority of physicians now working as employees, the threat from adverse selection, in which only the worst physicians seek employment, has abated. It seemed as though hospitals could avoid the worst losses associated with physician employment. What was less clear was whether they turn a profit when the physician's desire for income stability stood in conflict with the hospital's desire to get into risk contracting, or the physician's desire for normal hours stood in conflict with the hospital's drive for volume. Simply put, how could hospitals manage risk without pushing that risk down onto physicians? This is yet another key issue we will address in the next chapter. Looking around the healthcare landscape, the biggest change by far is the improvement in information technology, embodied by the widespread adoption of ERS. With 20/20 hindsight, we can see why the absence of ERS doomed the systems of the 1990s. How could one integrate care without an electronic record that could track the patient's movement across the sites of the IDN? How could PCPs direct patients to cost-effective specialists in the IDN without knowing who those specialists were? They couldn't. Just having the different providers who cared for the patient under one administrative structure did not do the job. ERS promised to solve this problem. This was not lost on healthcare executives at that time. Even AHRF had been heavily investing in a first-generation ERS. Perhaps no single element of today's healthcare systems has received as much attention, funding, and enthusiasm as the ERS and its various components, such as clinical decision support systems, CDSS, and computerized physician order entry, CPOE. CDSS might increase quality and reduce costs by improving physician decision-making, reducing medication errors, and facilitating the prevention and use of evidence-based recommended therapy. CPOE can reduce costs and improve quality by reducing medication error rates. The entire ERS could be used to evaluate the performance of individual providers and to develop recommendations for improvement. While there were other important differences between the 1990s and 2010s, AIRS are supposed to be a game changer, the silver bullet that solves all IDN problems. Point 29 Armed with advanced AIRS, hospitals could operate disease registries, improve care coordination, perform data analytics, and thereby advance population health management. The presence of AIRS helped to resurrect the promises at the heart of integration, coordinated care, seamless continuum of care, patient transitions, and the right care at the right time at the right place. Independent providers could neither afford to invest in AIR systems, which cost upwards of $20 million for a hospital, or $1 million for a physician group practice, plus annual maintenance costs, nor assure interoperability with AIRS used by other providers, even AIRS purchased from the same vendor. Mega providers could at least pay for them. Armed with a system-wide, fully interoperable, at least in theory, AIR, surely things would be different this time around. How did we know? Everyone said it was true. Today's mega providers believe they have an additional advantage. Unlike in the 1990s, they have developed infrastructure, to what actual degree is unknown, to accept alternative payment methods, including bundled payments and shared savings, and to work with incentives to lower costs. This infrastructure requires systems to push high-level incentives down into the organization, so that individual physicians and other decision-makers share the same goals of the triple aim as does the organization. As we will discuss in the next chapter, today's systems have struggled with finding the best way to achieve this alignment. Whole lot of shaking going on. It is obvious that things are really cooking in both the payer and the provider worlds during the new millennium. There is so much integration happening on so many fronts that surely things will now be different. Yet the more things change, the more they stay the same. While many managers have learned from past mistakes, and while innovations like ACOs and AIRS mean that today's systems have opportunities unavailable to 1990s IDNs, it is difficult to find systematic empirical evidence that today's systems are bringing us any closer to the triple aim than yesterday's systems brought us near the iron triangle. The next chapter will tell the said tale of unmet expectations. 6. Integration is still failing. Success is stumbling from one failure to another with no loss of enthusiasm. Winston Churchill. 1. The 1990s effort to integrate hospitals with hospitals, hospitals with physicians, and hospitals with health plans led to some rather unspectacular results. One would have hoped, and perhaps even expected, that hospital integration in the new millennium would demonstrate some impact on cost and quality. Hospitals now have powerful financial incentives to succeed, thanks to accountable care organizations and the gradual spread of alternative payment models. Hospitals also have new tools for influencing the physician's pen, including electronic health records, data analytics, and new contracts to better align incentives. Perhaps integration really is the magic elixir, and it just took more time than expected. We are still waiting. Dozens of academic studies have assessed the impact of integration and, for the most part, the news for consumers is all bad. Prices are up, quality is unchanged at best, and the quest for efficiencies continues. To quote the old Wendy's commercial, where's the beef? Impact of hospital mergers. The academic literature has virtually nothing good to say about the impact of hospital mergers. In 2012, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation summarized the research evidence as follows. Hospital consolidation generally results in higher prices. This is true across geographic markets and different data sources. When hospitals merge in already concentrated markets, the price increase can be dramatic, often exceeding 20%. 2. A comprehensive 2018 study echoes these findings, reporting that prices at monopoly hospitals are 12% higher than prices in markets with 4 or more competitors. 3. The RWJF study also reports that lower levels of hospital competition are tied to lower quality. A 2020 study in the New England Journal of Medicine finds that mergers have no impact on 2 key quality measures, and a modest negative impact on patient satisfaction. 4. The evidence on whether mergers reduce costs is mixed. Some studies suggest that hospitals do achieve savings when they consolidate under a single license, which is not the situation in most systems. The most favorable recent academic study of hospital mergers finds that they sometimes reduce the costs of supplies, likely through purchasing discounts. 5. These savings are mainly apparent when national hospital systems such as community health systems and HCA acquire small, mostly rural hospitals. Mergers between competing hospitals do not appear to generate cost savings. 6. Even when mergers do reduce hospital costs, this is of little comfort to patients who still end up paying higher prices. Hospital mergers may also affect referral patterns, though not always in ways that benefit patients. One study found that after UPMC acquired suburban hospitals, the system's flagship hospital saw an increase in referrals of profitable commercially insured patients from the affected suburbs, while rival Allegheny General Hospital saw an increase in referrals of less profitable patients. 7. We doubt whether UPMC is the only tertiary care hospital to design its feeder network in this way. The impact of physician-hospital integration. The research evidence on physician-hospital integration is more voluminous and more nuanced than the evidence on hospital mergers, though at the end of the day it is nearly as depressing. Integration advocates claim that it will lead to more efficient use of medical services. That hasn't happened. Vertical integration of hospitals with physicians often leads to more hospitalizations, especially when physicians are salaried. 8. Some studies also indicate that employment of physicians leads to more outpatient tests, outpatient procedures, and post-acute services. 9. There is even evidence that patients of employed physicians are treated at higher cost, lower quality, i.e., low value, hospitals, and receive a higher use of low value services. 10. There do not appear to be any care coordination efficiencies flowing from physician employment. Moreover, there is some evidence that physician productivity declines after employment. 11. Advocate Health System, the largest IDN in Chicago, provides an excellent case study. When it comes to creating an IDN, Advocate seems to do most things the right way. It was an early adopter of the most advanced AIR system, and it makes sure that its physicians are on the same AIR platform. It offers performance bonuses to physicians, and includes physicians at the highest levels of corporate decision-making. For everything it gets right, Advocate has not generated consistent savings under the Medicare ACO program. What makes Advocate an especially interesting case is that of its 6,000 affiliated physicians, only about 1,000 are employees. Yet Advocate is hard-pressed to find meaningful differences in performance between the two sets of physicians. As with hospital mergers, integration of hospitals with physicians has mixed effects on quality. On the one hand, vertical integration is associated with higher levels of several process quality measures, including health promotion activities, AIR adoption, use of chronic disease registries, and use of reminders for both patients and physicians. Point 12. On the other hand, vertical integration is associated with lower levels of several other metrics, including avoidable hospitalizations and inappropriate ER visits. Point 13. There is no consistent impact on mortality rates and patient safety. Point 14. None of this says that integrated systems have low quality. What the research does say is that integration does not lead to higher quality. These physicians in hospitals would probably deliver care that is every bit as effective if they had remained independent. Maybe it would have been a bit higher in some cases, maybe lower in others, but there would be no systematic difference. Overall, the evidence on physician-hospital integration is unambiguously ambiguous. It seems that, for every study that finds that integration works, there is another that finds the opposite, and a third that finds it makes no difference. To make matters worse for those looking for answers, very few of the studies we have cited have proper statistical controls, so that measured differences in performance may reflect unobserved differences in the types of patients who are treated by integrated providers, or in the types of physicians who choose to become employees. In other words, most of these studies are prone to biases, but we cannot determine the direction of the biases. There are fewer studies of the effect of hospital-physician integration on prices. Fortunately, the methods are usually free from bias and the results are clearer. The most prominent recent study examines what happened after hospitals across the country acquired hundreds of physician practices. 15. On average, physician prices increased by 14%. Total medical costs also increased, and there is no evidence that acquired physicians saved money elsewhere by reducing unnecessary utilization. A separate case study found that when two IDNs acquired 3 multi-specialty physician groups in the Twin Cities, average physician prices rose by 32 to 47%. 16. The researchers found limited evidence of quality improvements, and cautioned about disruptions in referral patterns. 17. As we discussed in the last chapter, some of the price increase stems from the payment of higher technical fees when physicians are employed by hospitals. Some of it is also contractual. The typical hospital has more bargaining leverage than the typical physician, and the large mega provider has a lot more leverage, which the hospital uses to negotiate higher prices for services performed by its employed physicians. Thus, the moment the hospital employs the physician, the fee automatically goes up. Research confirms that physician prices increase more when the acquiring hospital has more market power. 18. Impact on clinical integration. The 30,000-foot view of integration provided by academic research on cost and quality leaves much to be desired. The view on the ground, where we look at the steps that organizations are taking to effect change, is not much better. If integrated systems are to transform healthcare delivery, the payoff will come from enhanced clinical integration, which is supposed to lead to speedier and more accurate diagnoses, eliminate duplicative services, and improve handoffs of patients from one provider to another. Integrated systems are supposed to engage in disease management, implement unified electronic patient records to facilitate decision-making, track patient utilization throughout the year to promote population health, and track provider decision-making to provide feedback and incentives for quality improvement. While these are all promising ideas, systems are not translating them into reality. Research shows that vertical integration has had little systematic impact on the extent of clinical integration. 19. Nor are patients in vertically integrated systems more likely to perceive that they are receiving integrated care. 20. Why do we not observe elements of clinical integration in the presence of physician-hospital integration? One explanation is that hospitals are focused more on growing patient volume than on changing clinician behavior or practice patterns. Another explanation is that physicians enter into integrated arrangements in order to escape market risk and volatility. For both of these explanations, the reason we do not see clinical integration is that it was never the reason for physician integration in the first place. Advocates of integration argue that the infrastructure necessary to support clinical integration, especially interoperable AIR systems, requires more time. True believers are always patient. It is always possible that physician-hospital integration actually inhibits clinical integration. Several studies show that many desirable attributes of physician group culture, example collegiality, organizational identity, trust, autonomy, suffer under bureaucratic structures and ownership by hospitals. 21. The attenuation of such group attributes can be tied to lower quality of care. 22. Impact on medical group performance. Despite charging higher prices, physician-hospital integration is associated with poorer physician group performance and larger group operating losses. 23. During the 1990s, analysts commonly observed that hospitals lost an average of $100,000 per acquired physician per year. 24. Most of these were PCPs working under guaranteed salaried contracts with no performance incentives. More recent data suggest that hospitals' operating losses on physician practices have widened well beyond inflation. One survey of nearly 200 hospital-owned multi-specialty group practices found that over 90% were losing money, with an average annual loss of nearly $200,000 per physician. 25. Conversely, physician-owned groups reported a small net profit. More recent data suggest the losses on hospital-owned multi-specialty groups continue to rise. 26. Why have the hospital-owned groups incurred such large losses compared to physician-owned groups? The answer does not appear to be the different financial environments they face. Recent survey data gathered by the Medical Group Management Association, MGMA, indicate that physician-owned and hospital-owned groups identify 1. Financial management as their greatest challenge and 2. The same financial issues as most challenging. 27. These issues include dealing with rising operating costs, preparing for reimbursement models that place a greater share of financial risk on the practice, and managing finances with the uncertainty of Medicare reimbursement rates. Groups of different size also cite the same financial challenges. Upon employment, hospitals assume responsibility for physician salaries and benefits, malpractice coverage, office staff salaries and benefits, office space rental and equipment, and infrastructure investments needed to fulfill regulatory billing requirements. Hospitals also offer physicians higher compensation to induce them to join employment relationships, and may pay them the same compensation regardless of the patient's insurance status. This model of physician compensation is linked to higher resource use. 28. Another possible explanation lies in the structure of the two sets of group practices and their management. MGMA cost survey data reveal that hospital-sponsored groups have a higher percentage of primary care physicians who generate less revenue than specialists. Such groups also have more Medicaid patients, provide more charity care, and treat fewer commercially insured patients. Crucially, physicians salaried by hospitals exhibit 16 to 29% lower productivity. Collection rates are negligibly lower for employed physicians. These facts suggest that when it comes to acquiring physician practices, today's hospitals are suffering the same problems experienced by hospitals in the 1990s, poor incentives associated with salary guarantees and perhaps adverse selection of less productive physicians. In another repeat of the 1990s, hospitals in a hurry to integrate may exercise less due diligence in rapid practice acquisitions. Hospitals may lack good information about the acquired group's clinical and financial performance due to the lack of robust information technology inside the practice. Point 29. Beyond due diligence, hospitals may overpay physicians to avoid losing them to competing hospitals. To secure the transactions, hospitals may also acquiesce to the physician's desire to remain in their current locations and retain their current staffing and systems. MGMA cost survey data further reveal that while the top quartile of hospital-owned groups, in terms of overall performance, resemble physician-owned groups in many aspects of staffing and operations, they both differ substantially from the bottom three quartiles of the hospital-owned groups. Point 30. Lower performing groups employ fewer support staff per full-time equivalent physician, provide less square footage of space per physician, and have more branch clinics with fewer physicians per clinic. Such differences in management and operational efficiency may explain the financial performance differences between hospital-owned and physician-owned groups. Many hospitals actually operate their groups as dispersed collections of solo and partnership practices where the only things that really change after acquisition are the nameplates on the doors, the source of the physicians and office staff's W2S, and, of course, the billing rates. The impact of physician-hospital integration on hospitals' financial performance. The data reviewed above suggests that hospitals lose money on their physician employees. The situation may be even worse than it appears. Physician-related costs incurred by hospitals extend beyond the direct cost of employment to encompass physician subsidies for taking calls, administrative fees for serving as medical directors, and higher compensation under professional service agreements. For hospital systems with many such employed physicians, their physician operations are generating nine-figure operating losses. There is another side to the story. Most hospital systems report that employing physicians does not sap their financial health. 31. The discrepancy between physician-level performance and system-level performance may be partly explained by accounting. Hospital-owned physician groups have much lower revenues from ancillary tests, example lab, x-ray, and non-procedural items, example infused drugs, durable medical equipment. 32. This is because the hospital accounts for those revenues separately. Much of the economic impetus for salaried employment of physicians by hospitals has been to charge for ancillaries under the hospital's banner, increase these so-called ancillary revenues, and generate a significant fraction of hospital profits. At the same time, employed physicians are more likely to refer their patients to their hospital employers, generating potentially massive financial windfalls for their systems. Looking at it another way, systems could not afford not to own physician practices, lest they lose out on their share of referrals. The only problem with this referral defense is that, with competing systems all buying up practices, the resulting balkanization of the market leaves every system with roughly the same market share as before, only now they are paying the price. This too is a replay of the 1990s. There is nothing systems can do about it except try to figure out how to minimize the losses. The bottom line. Fueled by even higher prices, systems are enjoying record high revenues. Sutter Health had operating revenues of $12.4 billion in 2017, up 4.8% since 2016 and a whopping 41% since 2010. Partners Health saw 2017 revenues grow by 7% to $13.4 billion, and UPMC saw revenues grow by 16% to $15.6 billion. This growth is partly the result of higher prices, and partly the result of continued expansion, more hospitals, more physicians, and more outpatient facilities for those physicians to practice in. If you think that every abandoned bookstore and electronics shop in your neighborhood has been converted to an immediate care facility or diagnostic imaging center, you are not alone. An estimated 20.5 million square feet of new medical office buildings were constructed in 2018, shattering records set in 2016 and 2017. 33. The executives who run these huge systems reap substantial rewards. According to Medicare cost reports, more than 30 systems pay their CEOs more than $5 million annually. While these salaries are in line with those paid to CEOs of comparably sized, publicly traded businesses outside healthcare, the hospital systems are nearly all non-profit. Someone is clearly prospering. We pay for all these sky-high system revenues and executive salaries through higher insurance premiums, higher out-of-pocket payments, and higher taxes, both general revenue and social security taxes. While it is difficult to precisely connect system revenues and consumer expenses, one carefully conducted study estimated that the increase in hospital-employed physicians alone translated into a 12% increase in premiums for patients covered under the California ACA Health Insurance Exchange. 34. Even as systems continue their decade-long buying spree, they have enough money left over to post solid profits. Through much of the 2010s, the typical system enjoyed operating margins of 3 to 4%, which is well above the long-term average for hospitals. Some systems enjoy margins in excess of 5%, which rankles state regulators who question why highly profitable nonprofit systems should enjoy tax breaks that amount to 6% of revenues. 35. Ironically, the fact that all the mega providers are nonprofit may contribute to their growth, and not just because they avoid paying property and other taxes. We can only speculate, but it seems that in order to limit their profit margins and thereby avoid bad publicity and punitive taxes, nonprofits may be burying their free cash flows by spending their excess revenues on further expansion. All is not rosy for mega providers, however. As fast as revenues have increased, expenses have increased even faster. 36 From 2015 to 2017, average system operating margins dropped from 4.2 to 2.6%. 37 Systems have failed to develop cohesive physician organizations, standardized staffing, and standardized operational support functions, example purchasing, supply chain, scheduling systems, and centralized office locations. They have failed to contain expenses for electronic health records, the formation of accountable care organizations, and the operation of physician practices. 38 Fitch analysts expect continued deterioration. 39 This will give systems incentives to further increase prices if they haven't already pushed them as high they can. Unless systems can figure out how to make integration work, consumers might be paying even more for their failures. The black box of integration, physician alignment, is the missing ingredient. So how are we to explain 25 years of mediocre performance, at best, in hospital physician integration? Integration advocates often work with an implicit causal model in which hospital physician integration fosters physician alignment with the organization, which, in turn, helps promote collaborative efforts to improve quality and reduce costs. It all sounds so easy. The problem is that no one seems to know what alignment is, no one can show that integration fosters alignment, and no one can show that alignment leads to better quality or lower costs. Aside from that, the causal model makes sense. Physician alignment. Researchers and managers alike have for decades talked about the importance of physician-hospital alignment. Researchers have devoted countless pages in academic journals to describing how best to achieve alignment, and whether integration is necessary for it. Yet there is no clear understanding of what alignment means. Many people discuss alignment without defining it, and when they do, the definitions differ. Alignment has alternately been described as shared purpose, shared vision, shared goals, and shared efforts to achieve them. Cooperation, collaboration, and trust. Consistent financial incentives. Psychological attachment and identification with the hospital. Commitment and organizational identification, being a good citizen, and shared governance. A handful of studies empirically measure alignment using physician surveys. The dimensions studied, and some of their items, include organizational identification, effective commitment, teamwork, cooperative behaviors, example controlling cost and improving quality, trust, voice in decision-making, conflict resolution, perceived partnership, continuance commitment, willingness to continue admitting patients and to exert effort to help the organization, citizenship, participation in committees, physician autonomy, and quality of support services. 40 Alignment seems to be a catch-all term to describe any and all of the above. New kid on the block, physician engagement. Over the past 15 years, integration discussions also mention physician engagement and physician empowerment, two terms often used interchangeably. 41 Like alignment, the concept of engagement is broad and imprecise, and most definitions of engagement resemble alignment, commitment to the enterprise, willingness to exert effort, emotional attachment, trust, and so forth. Physician burnout is the opposite of engagement and, according to some health system CEOs, burnout is a national health crisis. 42 Evidence does suggest that physicians are quite pessimistic regarding the practice of medicine, that such pessimism is widespread and extends to value-based payment, and that dissatisfaction can be tied to characteristics of the medical practice, example financial stability of the practice, administrative burden of practice management, time, and complexity of using care. 43. Research on alignment and engagement. From the 1990s IDN gurus until today, advocates of hospital-physician integration have put the blame for high costs and subpar quality on fragmentation, every provider out for themselves. Integration is supposed to end fragmentation by promoting alignment. If only it were that easy. Research suggests that integration only marginally improves physician alignment with the hospital. One study found that salaried physicians show a marginally higher identification with their system. 44 Another study reported that any alignment between hospitals and employed physicians declines over time. 45 Still other researchers found that hospital acquisition of medical groups negatively impacts most dimensions of group culture, example collegiality, organizational identity, trust, autonomy. 46 One recent study indicates that physicians report greater alignment with independent physician-led practices than with system-led practices. 47 Another recent study summed up its findings this way: hospital physician alignment is only a matter of degree, is somewhat tepid, and may occur along some dimensions but not all. 48 This is not a ringing endorsement of integration. What explains the historical lack of alignment between hospitals and physicians? One reason is the historical tension between hospitals and medical communities, something that has persisted for nearly a century. 49 Medical professionals and healthcare executives have profoundly different cultures and norms. Many physicians are suspicious of the motives of managers with MBAs and MHAs, while managers believe that physicians are ignorant of economics and care little about efficiency. As a result, both groups often close ranks when, in fact, they have a lot to learn from one another. Such suspicions are fueled by hospital efforts to infringe on the physician's traditional turf, outpatient care. A second reason is that hospital executives sometimes feel that the integration process ends when physicians have signed their contracts, while sometimes ignoring the hospital processes that physicians find most dissatisfying. This gives physicians further reason not to trust hospital management. 50. The lack of trust manifests itself in a variety of ways. We frequently speak before groups of physician leaders, mostly department chairs or leaders of clinical or research teams. Nearly all of them work in large integrated systems, and nearly all of them are frustrated, leaders in name only, with little sense of how they are contributing to the success of their organizations. To get a better sense of how well they feel integrated into their organizations, we always ask the same questions. Suppose you were to invest your time and effort into an initiative that will improve the performance of your system. Maybe you assist the information technology team in finding ways to make the air more user-friendly. Or perhaps you develop a new protocol for dealing with morbidly obese patients. Whatever the investment, how many of you feel that you will be recognized by the senior leadership of the system? How many expect to receive additional compensation, or funds to enhance clinical practice and/or research? How many believe that virtuous behavior today will lead to rewards tomorrow? We are still astonished by the virtually unanimous negative responses. Unless physicians do something that is singled out in their contract serving as department head, for example, then they can probably forget about any tangible rewards for their efforts. A recent survey of physicians by Deloitte supports our experiences. 51 The majority of physicians receive productivity-based bonuses, and nearly half are rewarded for measurable quality of care indicators. Only 18% of respondents are rewarded for contributing to their hospital's teaching, research, or community activities, and only 7% are rewarded on the basis of the satisfaction of other physicians. Compensation seems to be entirely based on a checklist of a few easy-to-measure aspects of medical practice. Do anything that is not on the checklist, and the most the physician can expect is a pat on the back. The result is that physicians feel unappreciated and have some reluctance to go out of their way to help their hospitals. It is as if the turf wars that divided hospitals and physicians in the mid-20th century have never ended. This is not how things work in other businesses, especially where professional services are key to success. We will return to this problem in the final chapter of this book. Once again, surveys back up our experiences. Physicians are demoralized and pessimistic about their role within large systems. Many say they plan to retire early rather than endure life in an unappreciative bureaucracy. 52 The three most satisfying attributes of their practice is patient relationships, protection of the health of individuals, and intellectual stimulation do not seem to be emphasized in integrated or employed relationships. Instead, systems ask their physicians to become team leaders and help administer complex organizations, two attributes that physicians rank as least satisfying. It is hard to imagine how hospitals might develop alignment among such a disillusioned group, particularly given the historic lack of trust between the two parties. 53. In the 1990s, physicians sold their practices to hospitals because they received offers that were too good to be true. Today, they enter into these unhappy relationships out of financial necessity. Physicians face a revenue squeeze from Medicare and Medicaid, and pricing pressure from managed care organizations. At the same time, the cost of medical practice keeps going up. Added to all of this, a new generation of physicians seeks predictable hours of work. Integration has helped physicians gain economic security and job stability at the cost of their clinical autonomy and many of the practice attributes they find most satisfying. 54 They are not aligned with their hospitals. They are not satisfied with their jobs. It does not bode well for the integrated system. Over the longer term, both hospital and physician partners may find these relationships further strained by a double whammy, continuing cuts to Medicare and Medicaid, and a gradual shift in enrollments to these public programs. While hospitals will continue to squeeze what they can from commercial insurance contracts, even monopolists face limits to their pricing power. In the future, hospitals may have difficulty financing their investments in physician practices. Hospital margins are already beginning to shrink, as we have discussed. Hospitals may be faced with the prospect of unwinding some of these acquisitions, as they did once before, or of dramatically restructuring the employment contracts with physicians to reduce operating losses. Hospitals may pressure their employed physicians both to do more, see more patients per hour, admit more patients from the ER, refer more patients in network, and to do less, reduce lengths of stays, reduce inpatient costs in bundled payment and gain-sharing programs. Managing these often conflicting incentives and economic pressures will create new strains in their rocky relationships. Under the pressures of health reform, many hospitals may transition from their former role as physician's workshop to a new role as physician's sweatshop. Summing up, many hospitals have employed physicians as a quick and easy way to try to develop closer working relationships with them. They hope that in time, physicians will change how they use their pens. We believe that this hypothesized causal chain of aspiration has too many untested and weak linkages to ever bear real fruit. Thus far, the empirical evidence is on our side. Yet all of our major healthcare stakeholders, including Medicare, private insurers, and hundreds of provider systems, are staking the future on it. Relying on ACO payments and other alternative payment models, payers are dangling the carrot of financial incentives in front of healthcare systems that can figure out how to make integration work. Vertical integration, the strange case of accountable care organizations. With so much at stake and so much freely available data, courtesy of CMS, it is no surprise that academics have saturated the market with research on ACOs. Research appeared almost immediately after the first Medicare Pioneer ACOs began operating. As the Pioneer program unfolded, the news that emerged was not good. Among the Pioneer models, 23 of 32 had dropped out of the program by the time of its sunset in 2016. Program year 2015 data showed an average savings of $2.7 million among the remaining 12 participants. Of the $34 million earned, however, one ACO accounted for 72% of the savings. 55 Between 2012 and 2014, many showed improvement on the 30+ quality metrics. Even so, fewer than 30% sufficiently reduced costs to earn shared savings. The pioneers were having a hard time making a go of it. There is now a large body of research on the full Medicare ACO program. The results are no better. Roughly half of the ACOs reduced spending. The percentage of ACOs achieving savings was correlated with earlier start years and higher initial spending levels per beneficiary, implying that much of the ACO savings might merely have been regression to the mean that would have been realized anyway. ACOs led by physicians achieved a higher savings rate than hospital-led ACOs. Smaller ACOs, with a mean number of beneficiaries less than 10,000, achieved greater net savings per beneficiary than larger ACOs. Medical group participation in Medicare ACOs failed to change use of either high-value or low-value specialty care. 56 Additional research suggests little or no impact on hospital readmission rates. 57. The ACO movement has been beset by notable failures and continuing dropouts. Cornerstone Healthcare was one of the few ACOs that succeeded in achieving both higher quality and lower cost than its peers. By December 2016, however, Cornerstone had ceased to operate as an independent entity, plagued by the amount of personal debt assumed by its physicians to finance the ACO's infrastructure, as well as the defection of 70 of its specialists after CMS changed payment rules in 2015. 58. In the fall of 2016, a range of stakeholders and analysts engaged in an interesting exchange on the savings potential of ACOs. In August 2016, CMS pronounced that it had reaped $1.29 billion in total savings since 2012. That same month, Harvard researchers replied that half of the ACOs made money while half lost money in 2015. After paying providers their bonuses, CMS lost a net of $216 million, which did not include CMS program costs. 59 In September 2016, Levitt Partners reported that there was considerable variation in ACO cost and quality, and that quality was unrelated to both spending and savings. They also raised concerns about mean regression. Moreover, several managed care veterans dropped out of the ACO program, in part because they claimed they were already efficient and were given unfairly low benchmarks. By the end of 2016, the commissioners of MedPAC, an academic advisory board to CMS, called the ACO savings incredibly unsatisfying. As the research evidence piled up, things looked especially bad for hospital-led ACOs, which were supposed to be the exemplars for integration supporters. In September 2018, Harvard researchers reported that savings were roughly 3 times higher in physician group ACOs versus hospital-integrated ACOs. 60 Another study is less damning, finding that ownership type explains only 5% of the variation in ACO performance. 61 Among those ACOs that reduced costs, the biggest reductions were in inpatient care and post-acute care. 62 Savings in hospital-led ACOs were restricted to post-acute care. These ACOs seemed unable or unwilling to cut into the core business of their system owners. CMS continues to report that ACOs are saving money, now approaching $700 to $800 million annually. Based on a Medicare budget in excess of $2 trillion, this translates into a whopping 0.04% saving in total Medicare spending. 63 What none of these analyses addressed was how much money, time, and energy providers had to invest upfront in ACOs to reap these savings. According to one survey, ACOs spent an average of $1.62 million to participate in the Medicare program. 64 Multiply this by the nearly 1,000 participating ACOs, and the provider cost is twice the estimated savings to CMS. That is the optimistic view. The American Hospital Association estimates the cost of participation of hospital-led ACOs at about 10 times this amount. 65. Advocates of ACOs offer a range of explanations for their limited success. 66 They are still new. Physicians still have not bought in. Just give them more time. Perhaps the most obvious problem is that a program predicated on the power of economics doesn't actually provide very strong incentives. The vast majority of ACOs are in the safest version of the program, in which they receive modest bonuses if they cut costs, but pay no penalty if costs increase. ACOs in this program can do nothing to cut costs, and random chance alone will guarantee them the occasional shared savings. In 2018, CMS announced plans to move ACOs away from this safe option. The AHA and other provider groups warned that such a change, if enacted, would spur a hospital exodus from the program. So much for having more time. There is also the question of whether the incentives reach the individuals who matter most, physicians. Few if any systems push the shared savings down the organization. If doctors are adjusting their decisions to save money for the ACO, they are not seeing any of the returns. CMS might as well offer the shared savings to academics instead of hospitals. We seem to have the same control over physicians, which is to say none at all. It is the same old story. ACO advocates claim that they need more time to move down the learning curve. Time alone will not be enough. As we will explain in Chapter 10, managers must find a new way of working with physicians. Vertical integration and its discontents. We put a lot of blame on hospitals for the current crisis in American medical care. Physicians are their willing co-conspirators. Happy to enter into integrated arrangements, physicians are blunting the kinds of changes that integration could make possible. Physicians prefer fee-for-service payments over any of the alternatives promoted by payers and policymakers, even though they recognize that it is a more expensive model. 67 Overall, as little as 5% of physician compensation may be at risk for quality and other factors. 68 Why is this so? Back in the 1950s, physicians objected to HMOs on the grounds that fee-for-service payment led to better patient care and better financial rewards, while alternative payment models led to more uncompensated work and an incentive to not treat complicated conditions. Little has changed since then. Physicians remain allergic to alternate payment models, and believe that value-based payment worsens the quality of care. 69. A large percentage of physicians are unaware of how much their profligacy detracts from their hospital's bottom line. Physicians may not know whether their hospitals participate in ACOs or other risk contracts, and almost certainly do not know if their patients are attributed to an ACO. 70 This is also partly because ACO financial incentives exist at the contract level, not at the individual physician level, and because practice organizations shield physicians from direct risk-based or quality-based compensation. Practice-level financial incentives, including bonuses, are usually small and rarely based on cost of care. While physicians may receive performance feedback, less frequently are they released from contracts on the basis of quality or efficiency. This situation has remained unchanged for several years. 71. Not that it would be simple for hospitals to push the incentives harder. Enforcing complex pay-for-performance contracts involves costly documentation that is sure to foster physician dissatisfaction. A hospital may also wish to avoid drastic income reallocation among its medical staff, many of whom will blame their income shortfalls on data integrity and measure validity, further sapping physician enthusiasm. If hospitals push physicians, the physicians will push back. Physicians report being on a treadmill in their hospital practice. They have been forced to be more productive to avoid stagnating incomes, while simultaneously facing rising patient complexity that demands more of their time. They also feel that quality metrics are the bane of their existence, and are what managers want to extract from heirs, rather than what doctors or their patients perceive as quality care. For example, listening to patients. 72. The rollout of the Medicare Access and CHIP Reauthorization Act in 2015 has only added to physicians' woes. 73 MACRA introduces a pay-for-performance scheme known as the Merit-Based Incentive Payment System, or MIPS. MIPS is so complex that physicians must hire consultants to interpret and prepare for the changes, only to be frustrated as the Medicare Payment and Advisory Commission recommends substantial changes. 74 Overall, there is a high degree of risk aversion in the medical community toward these new payment models. Many practices have seen these models eat into their incomes. Others lack the capital to finance investments in infrastructure that may or may not help them to successfully manage under these new models. Physicians are not blind to the presence of waste in the system. Rather, they see it as the fault of someone else: insurers, drug makers, system executives. 75 This may explain why physicians are reportedly averse to contracting for risk they feel they cannot control, and are skeptical about new organizational models to improve quality or reduce cost. In a 2016 survey, only 34% of physicians somewhat or mostly agreed that hospital employment would enhance quality of care and decrease costs. 76. There is a strong disconnect here between the views of hospital executives and those of physicians. For example, when asked about the impact of value-based care delivery on quality, 62% of executives responded favorably, compared to 59% of clinician leaders and only 47% of clinicians. Executives and physicians also differ in their views about how to reduce costs. 77 Rank and file clinicians are least likely to see value-based reimbursement as their primary revenue model, 37%, and see value-based contracts as significantly improving the quality of care, 38%, or significantly lowering its cost, 36%. 78 With the growing size and bureaucracy of hospital systems, physicians feel that hospital executives with their overhyped MBA degrees are increasingly detached from the reality of medicine at the front line of care delivery, and are increasingly focused on data, metrics, and policies, example standardization, in-house referrals. 79. Despite payer efforts to promote value-based purchasing, physicians continue to over- and under-utilize care. Part of the problem is that of staying current with the sheer growth in the scientific literature. New medical practice that is widely cited is often contradicted by subsequent evidence. It is no wonder that physicians are often slow to change their practice patterns. Physicians also make low use of data on quality or cost in referrals. 80 Growing physician burnout at the front line of care delivery may further increase as payment reform receives greater impetus and the physician supply shortage worsens. 81 Some analysts have called for a quadruple aim that includes improving the work lives of providers. 82. While alignment and engagement remain elusive goals, hospital executives continue to try to work with their medical staff in the old-fashioned way, kickbacks. The trade press is replete with stories of executives offering bribes to surgeons and other providers for patient referrals, and then covering up the kickbacks in hospital corporate tax filings. 83 Other scams involve 1. Waiving patients out-of-network payments, illegal under Medicare, but legal for commercial payers in some states, and concealing the discounts as uncollected bad debt. 2. Bribing physicians to refer patients to the hospital's in-house diagnostic testing, and 3. Swapping referrals for ancillary management contracts with outside testing and treatment centers. 84. We have met the enemy and he is us. Patients' beliefs and behaviors can also undermine the success of payment reform and new organizational models. More than half of the U.S. population assigns low importance to personal health. 85 When it comes to taking better care of their health, more than a third are either aware but struggling, or disengaged and overwhelmed. 86 As a result, not enough Americans engage in healthy behaviors, take proper preventive care measures, or engage in disease-specific self-care behaviors. Few care about medical costs unless it hits them in the pocketbook. More generally, there is a problem with health literacy. Like physicians, patients may not be aware of what low-value care is, let alone be intelligent consumers of high-value care, partly because they face limited exposure to costs. As many as one-third of patients have difficulty envisioning benefits from avoiding low-value care. Among the less educated, the proportion is as many as one-half. One report describes an unhealthy truth: only 1 in 6 Americans comprehends the magnitude of the problem of chronic disease and its impact on mortality and spending. 87 Another suggests that patients are uncertain about how to manage their chronic conditions. 88. To be sure, there is hope that giving patients more skin in the financial game, through higher deductibles and the information necessary to compare provider prices, will foster greater shopping and use of high-value services. However, some studies suggest that when patients pay more out of pocket, they cut back on all types of high-value and low-value care. By the same token, early efforts to promote price transparency have had limited success. 89. Electronic health records to the rescue. In a 2008 study, the Congressional Budget Office estimated that electronic health records could reduce spending by as much as $1 trillion over the course of a decade. 90 Vertical integration supporters argued that large systems would be best positioned to generate these massive efficiencies. The evidence says something quite different. Numerous studies have found mixed evidence about the benefits from AIR. 91 There may be a slight improvement in outcomes at hospitals that have adopted the most advanced AIR technologies, but there is no systematic reduction in costs. There are many reasons for these disappointing results. For one thing, vendors have been slow to assure interoperability, even among providers using the same vendor platform. Industry leader Epic has made strides with its Care Everywhere initiative, which in theory allows patients to share information with providers. Epic's One Virtual System worldwide facilitates direct data exchange among providers, allowing them, for example, to share test results, potentially eliminating duplication, and make appointments for patients on each other's calendars. Epic's systems may be state-of-the-art, but providers tell us that many inconsistencies and incompatibilities remain. Sharing data across Epic platforms, even within the same health system, is no piece of cake. Even as Epic irons out its problems and rolls out more features, its system will still have limited use for providers on platforms other than Epic. Unless Epic takes over the currently fragmented market, there will be a Wild West aspect to AIR for the foreseeable future. More problematic is the reluctance or inability of physicians to integrate the vast storehouse of information available from AIR into their practices. Not without reason, many physicians find that the time required to use the AIR is excessive, while the information contained within is overly simplistic, and the treatment recommendations are not always relevant to the needs of their patients. According to a 2018 Harris/Stanford University survey, half of all PCPs believe that AIRs detract from their practice, and 59% believe that AIRs need a complete overhaul. 92. A recent article in Fortune magazine provides a cautionary tale, recounting how the air was rushed to market too fast and engendered several unintended and harmful consequences for U.S. physicians. 93 Indeed, a recent Medscape poll reveals that more primary care physicians believe errors have decreased the quality of care in their workplace than believe it has increased it. Tellingly, the vast majority of these physicians had no input in the choice of the air used. 94. Physicians pour out their frustrations in a recent article published in the popular trade magazine Becker's Hospital Review, titled, 25 Quotes That Show Just How Fed Up Physicians Are with Errors. 95. Here are just two of the juiciest quotes. Too often I pull up a record and it's almost impossible to really get an understanding of the storyline. On a daily basis I can't find the information that is really valuable to me. In a sense it's turned us into data entry clerks. The haughty, overbearing audacity of our federal government and hospitals which forces us to absorb millions of dollars in lost time is maddening. Patients have their own complaints. One of the authors of this book recently visited the same specialty care facility twice in 1 week for a diagnostic procedure and follow-up discussion of the results. Despite the health system's use of Epic's Care Everywhere Air, the medical staff had to request and enter the same personal information both times, as the patient wryly smiled. Errors not only exact a toll on physician and patient time, but are fraught with misleading, hard to use, and even inaccurate data. Doctors will tell you, as they have certainly told us, that errors are primarily in place for billing purposes. Not surprisingly, providers are encouraged to enter more data in order to earn more. This places an enormous burden on analysts to determine whether the data really reflect what is happening with the patient at the point of care. Remember this the next time a consultant says that analytics based on error data are a game changer. Moreover, the increased data flow requires additional information on the evidence-based responses that providers and other caregivers should undertake in acting on the data. A related problem is that only 20 to 30% of clinical data are structured, example computable numbers, the rest are encoded in messy and often inconsistent language. Yet another problem is the shortage of tech staff with data analytic skills, example database experts, computational scientists, data scientists. Without such added capabilities, organizations have difficulty turning data into actionable information. Patients have their own stories about error data. In the aforementioned pair of visits for a diagnostic procedure, just about the only information shared across the two offices was prior drug use. For some reason the team that performed the procedure entered the wrong drug information, and the team that handled the follow-up care did not correct it, even when the mistake was pointed out. From now on, medical providers using this Epic system will scratch their heads as to why one of us is using an obscure drug that, according to WebMD, has no known practical use. Again, this is hardly an isolated anecdote. When analysts explain why integrated delivery systems might succeed today despite the colossal failures of the past, they often point to AIR, which was not available to the AHERFs of the 1990s. We are still far from realizing the trillion-dollar promise of AIR. Everyone is waiting for full interoperability. Without the ability to share information across providers, there is little opportunity to scale data and coordinate patient care across care sites. Most importantly, physicians are fed up. As with much else that is wrong with health systems, meaningful change is impossible without physician buy-in. Chasing Kaiser, provider-sponsored plans. The most audacious move made by IDNs in the 1990s was to get into the health insurance business. Very few IDNs directly sold insurance, instead opting to contract with traditional health insurers to accept full financial responsibility for the health spending of enrollees. 25 years later, this still seems like a reasonable strategy, provided that IDNs can really control costs. It would also help if they could adequately predict patient healthcare risks so as to avoid adverse selection. Hundreds of health systems have dipped their feet in the water by participating in accountable care organizations. A few dozen have jumped in at the deep end, once again offering what we today call provider-sponsored health insurance plans. There are currently about 150 provider-sponsored plans. Several plans that began in the 1980s or earlier, including the Geisinger Health Plan, North Central Pennsylvania, Presbyterian Health Plan, New Mexico, and the Marshfield Clinic Health Plan, Central Wisconsin, are market share leaders and very profitable. In contrast, most of the plans introduced by IDNs in the 1990s barely got off the ground, lost money, and were quickly divested. A few IDNs kept the faith, and between 2010 and 2016 they sponsored 37 new health plans. Yet again, history seems to be repeating. As of 2015, only 4 of the new plans were profitable. 96 This is not too surprising. New health plans usually incur losses as they build market share. The losses in some systems have been too painful for many plan sponsors. The giant Northwell Health System in New York opened its Care Connect insurance to much fanfare in 2013. By 2015 enrollments had swelled to over 100,000, but took $32 million out of Northwell's bottom line. When losses swelled to $157 million the following year, Northwell had had enough, and it shut down the plan. 97 Ohio's Mercy Health System tried to avoid growing pains by acquiring Kaiser's local health plan in 2013. Kaiser had suffered 5 consecutive years of losses. Mercy did no better, and after losing $115 million in the first 9 months of 2015, it shut down the plan for good. Other recent high-profile failures include Piedmont/Wellstar, Catholic Health Initiatives, Innova, and even the Mayo Clinic. The facts on the ground provide some damning evidence about the potential for provider-sponsored plans to transform healthcare delivery. There is only a smattering of systematic research evidence on provider-sponsored plans, and results are once again discouraging. One study found that states with a large concentration of provider-sponsored plans experienced faster growth in per capita health spending. 98 Another found that provider-sponsored plans serving the Medicare Advantage market have higher premiums, controlling for quality and plan benefits. 99 The most recent study finds no consistent relationship between sponsorship, costs, and quality. 100 Higher spending does not seem to be helping the plans. Nearly half of provider plans suffered negative margins in some or all of the period from 2011 to 2014. 101 Not all the studies paint such a negative picture. One found that provider-sponsored Medicare Advantage plans provided higher quality care with greater patient satisfaction, while another found that hospitals with provider-sponsored plans had higher bond ratings. The latter study does not consider which is cause and which is effect. 102. To a large extent, today's provider-sponsored plans are falling victim to the same problems that plagued IDNs in the 1990s. Some are financial. Provider-sponsored plans are often undercapitalized and lack reserves to weather financial losses or unforeseen regulatory changes. Other barriers are managerial. Healthcare providers continue to lack the expertise required to run insurance companies. They are unskilled at designing and marketing insurance. They lack underwriting expertise, which leads to underpricing and adverse selection. To make matters worse, some provider-sponsored plans do not contract with providers outside the system. The resulting narrow network plans have limited appeal in the commercial insurance marketplace. If that were not bad enough, some provider plans are finding that incumbent insurers may drop them from their networks in retaliation for starting rival health plans. 103 McKinsey concluded there is no guarantee for value creation by provider-payer integration, since the costs incurred may outweigh the cost savings. 104. One particular issue, the inability to reach a minimum efficient scale, i.e., enough enrollees, is especially important. There is a broad industry consensus that a plan must have at least 100,000 members in its local market to reap the benefits of scale economies for things like sales and administration. An even larger size allows a plan to negotiate deeper discounts with independent providers. By contrast, health plans operated by providers have an average enrollment of only 30,000 lives, and many of these are system employees who prefer to be treated at system hospitals, leaving the system little leverage with other providers in its market. The heart of the problem is the failure of IDNs to control costs. We have talked about this ad nauseum, and in Chapter 10 we will offer some suggestions for achieving efficiencies. Even if systems could not trim the excess fat from medical care delivery, they could save money for their plans by charging lower internal transfer prices for hospital and physician services. Done right, this can lead to a more competitive insurance product and more overall profits for the system. 105 Add some efficiencies and the plan could effectively compete against larger rivals. The problem is that transfer pricing creates a big management problem. What the insurance division of the IDN calls efficiencies, the provider divisions call a loss of revenues. Providers have been at odds with payers for the better part of the past century. Can IDN executives navigate this tension any better within their own systems? It would be easy for them to set lower transfer prices, but few, if any, appear to be doing so. We do not yet know how IDNs will pacify hospitals that create efficiencies to the benefit of the integrated insurers, largely because those efficiencies are just not happening. Winners and losers. For nearly 100 years, dominant hospitals have pursued strategies to secure their market positions, more often than not at the expense of consumers. Integration into IDNs is just the latest effort. If we look today at the flagship hospitals of the largest systems, we find that they are more expensive, both on a cost per case and on a total cost of care basis, than the services of their most significant in-market competitors. 106 This, despite operating in purportedly competitive healthcare systems that should be rewarding efficiency. To understand why power persists, we must revisit the role of antitrust law and enforcement in protecting healthcare competition. This we will do in the next chapter. No text can be read aloud.